Yeah, I'm sorry. Um, where are the two types of bones usually found? Um, I think they're found in all types of bones. Are spongy bones good or bad? Depends on what you call good or bad. So spongy bone, are spongy bones squishy? Quite the opposite, actually. If you could believe it, spongy bones are actually they're more firm. They are better at they're better at protecting than compact bone. Yes, they're more hard. It seems a bit weird, but it's because their matrix kind of like is able to absorb shock. So yeah. Well, actually the spongy bone protects is I don't know. It's very hard to have spongy bone on the outside. I was asked the question, why not switch the job? Well, spongy bone also has one main job, and it's to protect bone marrow. And like, if you crack open a bone, then okay, no big deal. It is able to repair. But if you crack like the end of a bone, all of a sudden you've got a major problem, right? Because your red marrow is malfunctioning, your yellow marrow is malfunctioning, your nutrient storage is all messed up. You also can create a lower amount of blood cells than you normally can. So that is a major problem. And to the body, that's way more of a disadvantage than to just like let bones crack in the middle. So that's why the stronger spongy bone is found towards the end of the bones. I'll now bone cells. So to understand bone cells, we'll need to understand a process. So actually, believe it or not, your bones are fracturing if you will only survive an hour if you don't have bones, you probably won't survive a minute. Yeah, I think a minute would be very close. That's how important bones are. You die without them. Um, okay, back to bone cells. So what's actually happening in your bones right now is that like if I slam the table, like you might have heard, then actually my bone has now a microscopic fracture and it's like broken very, very, very slightly. So what happens when the bone is slightly broken is that this process that I'll now explain comes into play. So first, you have the osteoclasts. And what these osteoclasts do is that they dissolve very, very small portions of bone. So like they don't like squirt acid onto your bone and then your bone is dissolved, gone, but it just removes the fractured part. And what the osteoblasts do is that they go over the parts the osteoclasts have. Um, they go over the parts where the osteoclasts have just removed bone from, and they lay down new bones. So yeah. Um, and it's actually if you get a bone out of your body while you die, your chance of survival go very down. I thought our bones protect us. Yeah, bones still protect us. Doesn't this kind of happen when you work out with muscles? Yes, like muscles can also kind of tear and then repair and better. How do osteoclasts and osteoblasts get their name? That you have just predicted what I was just about going to go to. So now it might sound strange that the osteoblasts are kind of building and osteoclasts are the destroyers. But these words, I believe they come in Greek, and blast is build and clast is destroy. So that's where it comes from. Why do bones fracture that easily? Well, I mentioned that they're very small fractures, right? So like it's not very big impact. So if like it doesn't make if there's a microscopic fracture, it still counts, sure, but like in terms of protecting your organs, you'd much rather break your bones than like break your heart or whatever. Um, are there stem cells in the bones? Actually, the cells. Actually, very good point. Yes, there are. I will not go deeply into them, but they are called osteogenic cells. I have a question with them in the Kahoot. Hint, it's the wrong answer, but yeah, good to know. How many bones are there in a body? Commonly, you will see there are 206 bones in the adult body, but actually there are like a lot more small ones that don't really count towards the 206. So yeah. How many kinds of bones are in your body? Depends on what you mean by types of bones. I've already gone over the 5 main types of bones. If you don't have bones, you will die. True. Um, well, can't they protect big fractures as well? Well, yes, osteoblasts and osteoclasts do go over big fractures, but like because the scale is so big, then it takes a lot of time. So that's why fractures don't heal very easily. Why are there more bones in a baby than an adult if a baby is smaller? That is a very, very, very good question. You're into something in a child. Yes.
Oh, I know.
Yes, yes. A lot
So I'm pretty sure it's because like their like the bones end up like merging.
that, yes. Bones, eventually they merge. They fuse together precisely. I am being flooded with requests. If you have a bone that is broken outside of your skin, could it still heal? It would be really hard. I'm not even sure if it can. So here's the anatomy of a long bone. I'm not going to go into much detail on the specific details. Well, I have a lot of questions. I will not go into detail about the specific like terminology, but what you need to know are like the regions of the long bone. So on the long end are what's known as the epiphysis or epiphysis or whatever the hell you call it. But in the epiphysis or whatever, basically this is like the ends of the bone. There is the diaphysis, which is like the long shaft of a long bone. And then at the other end, there's another epiphysis. But the most crucial part actually is this thing over here. It's called the metaphysis or whatever. And within the metaphysis, you will find one of two things. One is the epiphyseal line, and two is the epiphyseal plate. Now, I will go into this in a bit more detail, but basically the epiphyseal plate and line are how bones grow. And eventually that's kind of how bones merge, I think, as has been described before. So yeah, going further on epiphyseal plate versus line. So on the right, you have a child skeleton, and this shows the epiphyseal plate. And what's most important about this is that the epiphyseal plate facilitates growth of bone. So do you guys know approximately when like humans stop growing taller?
About like 25 years old?
25 is a bit on the high side. I'm seeing a lot of like after puberty, earlier. I think, yeah, usually around the late
Maybe
10s.
like 18.
Yeah, late 10s, early 20s would be around when you stop growing. And that is precisely when the epiphyseal plates turn into on the what's on the left, the epiphyseal line. So what happens normally is that the epiphyseal plate will grow, they will like have more, they'll construct the diaphysis and then they'll push down. Actually, I have one person say 15. That, well, it kind of depends on gender. So like male versus female have different. For males, it's later than females, I believe. Females are around 15. What happens if you dislocate your kneecap? Not, I think worse things can happen to you. That's definitely not the worst. But what's crucial is that this epiphyseal plate is only found in children. And so that's a very good indicator of how old a skeleton is. What's that kid doing? No clue. But you'll get a lot of questions just centered around this concept of the epiphyseal plate. And if you're shown an X-ray image with it, like there's a clear gap right here, but over here, I can't even make out a big line. But in the epiphyseal plate, then you can clearly see a gap, and that is where bone is being secreted. And that's how the end of the epiphyses slowly move further away from each other. How do two bones fuse together? I think that's when like you have cartilage and then the bones just recognize they're supposed to be together and they fuse together. I'm not very clear in that either, unfortunately. Okay, moving on to the osteon. There's also a lot of complicated vocab here. There's actually a lot of complicated vocab throughout the lecture. Do you feel bones merging? I'd assume you're mostly at the stage where bones have stopped merging. So I don't think you really feel bones merging because it's such a long process, right? So it happens all way too slowly for you to be able to feel anything. Now here's an osteon. There's a lot of complicated info, but the one main concept I want to introduce to you is what's called a Haversian canal. So basically, bones are alive, and there are a lot of what are known as osteocytes in the bone. And if you haven't picked up by now, the prefix ost usually means bone. So if you see something like osteoporosis, which we will cover quickly, that has to do with bones as well. But most importantly, the Haversian canal provides blood blood to the individual bone cells. So like if your Haversian canals are blocked, all of a sudden your bones start to get less and less blood and they could die. So it's very crucial that nothing bad happens to the Haversian canal across a wide area. And within these Haversian canals, they're interconnected by what are called Volkmann canals. That's less important, but it's just very important for long bones to have Haversian canals. Where is the osteon? The osteons are located in compact bone. Whoever is annotating shouldn't be. Also, this is ossification. It's a very complicated process, and I don't think I'm going to go into it in a lot of detail because, frankly speaking, I'm not very familiar with ossification. But you just, for the purposes of this program, you should know that ossification is what is two bones fused together and are supposed to be fused together. I'm honestly not the most clear on that either. But ossification is when usually cartilage turns into bone. And there are two types of ossification. The one shown right here is intramembranous. The next one is endochondral. Which question has the wrong answer? I totally forgot, honestly. Back here. So basically, yeah, this is just basically how bone is created. In kids, this will happen around. Actually, I'll give that as a question to you. Where does bone grow in long bones? We have covered this already. What are bones made of? A lot of what your body is made up of, cells, but also some other compounds. Okay, I have one correct answer. A whale spit is definitely not it. Can your body make too many bones? I haven't heard of that yet. Well, one unit is correct. It's the epiphyseal plate. Bones will grow there. Looks like sunny side eggs. You see things your way. What's the material made to make bones hard? There isn't one material, but I will cover that later. All right, now let's move on to fractures. So here you see 8 fractures, but like, it's just a bunch of terminology. Honestly, if you have a cheat sheet, you definitely should just put it on here and not care about it a lot. But like you have closed fracture, open fracture, where the bone actually goes out of your skin. So yes, that's possible. I don't know how you treat that though. It seems such a dangerous process. You have transverse, where bone is kind of forced into each other. Spiral is the worst, actually. It's when your bone twists way too much, and it kind of forms this like slanted. It hurts a lot. It happens a lot with athletes too. You have comminuted when does bone use calcium from the body use calcium from the bones? Well, calcium is used to supply the bones mostly. If your bone shatters completely, you're probably dead. I thought open is the worst. Maybe open is the worst, but spiral hurts a lot. Which one is the least bad? Probably green stick. Well, you need surgery. Usually for fractures of these of this caliber, you probably need like extreme medical care. Surgery, probably. I'm not sure when you'll need surgery, but these are all very bad, and you're definitely not moving. You're definitely not going to be able to move. Which ones need surgery? I'm actually not quite sure. If you're interested, you can definitely go search it up. Now here are a few more fractures I haven't mentioned. Of these, green stick is very interesting. It kind of, when it cuts partially into the bone, this type of fracture is extremely common in children. So green stick does not seem as bad. Yeah, maybe you've had a green stick fracture before. Who knows? Why is green stick called green stick? I have no idea. Comminuted is the only one that needs surgery to treat because the bone won't grow. That is interesting. I have not heard of that. Very, very nice. All right, moving on to fracture healing. So here's a lot of information, a lot of vocab words. So, and I'll just basically explain to you what they mean. So, does your bone hurt? Is it only your muscle that makes the stuff hurt? No, there are nerves through bones. That means you could have your bone hurt. You know, like, what was it called again? I think like the funny spot on your elbow, like if you hit it, it has this weird feeling. That's because of the bone sends a weird nerve signal back to your brain. So yeah, but is new bone stronger or less strong? It's stronger. So that's why bone becomes stronger. I think it's called the funny bone. Yeah, thanks for reminding. Humorous. That's my favorite joke. I will tell you guys the humorous joke when we have time. But moving on to fracture healing, what happens in a fracture is that you have blood vessels, right? And then when the bone breaks, the first instinct the blood does is it immediately rushes out of the bone. So you try to prevent anything crucial from escaping. So it just makes a massive clot. And after it makes this massive clot, it hardens. And then what's known as a callus forms. So these calluses are very strong and they kind of facilitate the rebuilding of bone. And inside the bones, we have osteoblasts and osteoclasts at work. There's blood vessels trying to reform, and then other kind of like calluses, like strong bone is reformed, spongy bone, compact bone, they're reformed. And finally, you heal. And this process gets noticeably slower in adults. So if you're gonna get fracture in your life, maybe as a child, it's the best. Who knows? I'm not telling you guys to get a fracture or anything, but fractures definitely heal stronger. Feel better. Okay. Bones of the human body. Now, if you're looking like this skeleton right here, and you're like, why the heck do we need to know what are the names of the bones of the human body? Because this, honestly, this is the most pure memorization it gets in Science Olympiad. But here is the good part. You have a cheat sheet, and in the cheat sheet, you can have diagrams. So what you can do is, if you absolutely have to, you can put the bones into you can put a diagram of the bones into your cheat sheet. So then you can memorize them. And honestly, one of my tips for anatomy is just use diagrams to explain all the complex stuff that you need. It does it so much better than they don't do it so much better than if you did it with words. They missed thigh. Well, the thigh really isn't a bone. I'm not even sure it's anatomic. Oh no, the thigh kind of is a muscle. The bone associated is the femur, which actually just so happens to be the longest bone. And here are just a lot of the bones in the body. Cranium is important. Your sternum is important, but it's not there. The thigh isn't a bone. What's the shortest bone? It's a bone in your ear, which I forgot the name of, but it's the smallest one. Well, I guess thigh bone might be a thing, but scientifically it's called the femur.
The smallest bone in your body is called the staple bone. It's in your ear. Call
Yeah,
it staple.
That's probably the one. Thank you for the addition. While we're here, I would like to turn your attention to humerus, the funniest type of bone. Ha ha ha, I'm so humorous. Ha ha ha. Everyone laugh, please. Owner. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Next. Types of joints. Okay. More random vocabulary. By far, I think the only one that you should mostly pay attention is synovial. These joints are the ones that are by far the most common, and they're the very flexible types. So like your elbow or your knees, they're very flexible. You can move. Is that the bone that causes the bone joke? Funny bone? I don't think so. Maybe it is. I'll have to double check. But the synovial joints they're just very flexible. Other types of joints are less. There's a lot of vocab here that you should put in your cheat sheet, but It's not really, I guess you can just put in your cheat sheet. If you want to memorize it, you can totally do it. When is a Kahoot going to start? Very soon. We have types of synovial joints. Okay, 6 types. I think only 2 of them are rather common. The first is the hinge joint, which I've definitely drawn a too big of a circle. The hinge joint. So it's like the elbow. So what's characteristic of a hinge joint is that it kind of opens and closes like a door. So like this is, I can't really demonstrate it very well, but like if you like kind of flex your arm onto the side, you can extend it, you can flex it, you can move it in 2 dimensions. So that's a hinge joint. It's kind of like a door. The second important type is the ball and socket joint. So for anyone who's played games on a controller, will your knee be a hinge joint too? Yes. That is the other major hinge joint. The rest are not very important. Now, the ball and socket joints are very free. Can someone name another ball and socket joint that isn't presented in the diagram? Arm, spine, not really. Finger, not really, but shoulder is the one. Your shoulder, like
Back shoulder.
you can extend this guy like literally everywhere. So it's very flexible. You can move it everywhere. So it is the other main ball and socket joint besides your legs. Next. Well, the neck is not one joint actually. Neck has a lot of bones in it. It has a few vertebrae as well. And so those are others. Is a gliding joint a synovial joint? Yes. Like some chemicals involved in the skeletal system. This compound is called hydroxyapatite. It's the primary mineral in the bone, and so it gives structure. It's formed with calcium, so this is where the calcium comes in. And so yeah, is Jeff Bezos a joint? Not that I know of. I don't think so. Let's see. Also, the other important one is vitamin D. So you get vitamin D from the sun. And so that's why doctors say, go in the sun, go in the sun, get sunlight, get sunlight. That's because you need vitamin D to help your body absorb calcium in the stomach. So yeah, those are some important chemicals within the skeletal system. And that is not the end of my lesson. All right, next is cartilage. So in your body, there are more types of cartilage, but there are 2 main types. So the first main type is called hyaline cartilage, and it's kind of found in your nose. Like it's kind of flexible. Like you can move your nose around a bit, right? You can do that. It's also found in your ears. Now your ears are definitely very flexible. So while these are flexible, they are still kind of strong. And so hyaline, well, yeah, hyaline cartilage is like standout point is that it is very flexible. The other type of cartilage is fibrocartilage. It's found between the vertebrae and in the ribs, between bones. Is class over yet? 10 more minutes. So these types of cartilage, sorry, are more strong, and so they kind of help with shock absorption. Like that's why it's not just all rib. If you have a rib and then you apply a lot of amount of force, maybe it'll snap. But with fibrocartilage, at least it's going to be able to absorb some of the shock. Could you die if you don't get enough sunlight? Well, eventually you will. So get sunlight, please. Your nose is flexible too. Yes, it's also made of hyaline cartilage. Yeah, hyaline is a type of cartilage. Is a type of cartilage. Fibrocartilage definitely is a type of cartilage. Now I'll move on to some disorders, which is the last thing I'll talk about. Now in the contests, no, there's actually no bone in your nose. This is cartilage. Cartilage can become bone, but not in your nose. So here are a few disorders of the skeletal system. Disorders are tested a lot in your skeleton system. How do moles live without enough vitamin D? This is human anatomy, not mole anatomy. I'm really sorry. There's a hard part with cartilage. Well, at the very top of your nose, maybe it's still bone, but like, yeah, the bridge is bone. The bridge is bone, but like this is cartilage. Moving on to disorders. So you have scoliosis, which is the lateral bending of the spine. So like if your spine is straight, scoliosis would be kind of like curved spine. There's also something called rickets, which would happen if you don't have enough vitamin D. Then your bones become really, really weak. And then, yeah, like an old granny's kind of. Is scoliosis like hunchback? Not precisely. Scoliosis is the lateral bending. So like in a hunchback, maybe you just have something like this. But in scoliosis, it's like that, like it's curving this way. I'm not quite sure how I can draw it. I'm sorry, but definitely look it up and you can find more info than I can provide here. You have osteoarthritis, or more commonly known as arthritis, where your joints suddenly hurt and you can't move around. You also have osteoporosis, which is when bones become less dense. And one key thing about osteoporosis is that actually women are more susceptible to osteoporosis than men. And definitely old people are more susceptible than younger people. And this is partially due to the hormones that women give off. They are not like as bone density increasing as men's. What average age do these happen? I don't think there's an average age, but they definitely are more common with age. Herniated disc is actually shown in a diagram. It is this one, where basically the vertebrae have kind of crushed this disc, and this leads to hurting and kind of numbness in the bottom part of your body. So like you definitely don't want to have a herniated disc on your neck, because that completely immobilizes your upper part of the body. But if it's maybe lower down in the back, then maybe you only lose access to your legs. So yeah. Some tips and tricks finally. Anatomy is actually a very competitive event, and there's just a lot of information and a lot of teams want to do well. My personal tip is that you need to use pictures. So it's better to explain complicated processes. And even though pictures seem like they're more space, they explain processes way better than you could with words. And once again, I think experience is key. You need to take a lot of practice tests, get a feel for what could be on the actual test. And these tips, I think, apply to, you have taken anatomy and please second. Are you Div B? We're going to do the Kahoot momentarily. If you've taken second, you might actually be more qualified to teach this than I am, but yeah. Anyways, I think that wraps it up for the skeletal system. Let's start the Kahoot. Classic. After the Kahoot, are we done for today? Yes. Once again, the link goes in chat. Let's give a bit more time for people to join. You can basically have too many bones because some people have an extra rib. Sure. Let's see. I think we can start now. Always, you can join in the middle of a game. So yeah, let's get started. Answer choice is on. I think so. Right, the sternum is an example of which type of bone? I remember mentioning this. And the correct answer is flat. It's a flat bone that protects your heart, your liver, and basically your chest. Next question. This bone cell creates bone. Who am I? So about the stem cell topic earlier, yes, the stem cells in the bone are called osteogenic cells. Basically, they can, for those of you who don't know what stem cells are, they're basically cells that are really unique because they can turn into other types of cells. So like an osteogenic cell, if we're short on osteoblasts, they can become osteoblasts, which, by the way, are the correct answer. Osteoclasts, remember, they destroy bone. But if you need extra of those, osteogenic cells can also become osteoclasts. Moving on. Are males or females more likely to be diagnosed with osteoporosis? This should be relatively fresh in your head. And good, a vast majority of you got this one correct. Their females are more likely. Yes, I literally just did tell you this 1 minute ago. Woman suffering from back pain and general pain and weakness throughout her legs. I also did just mention this about a minute ago. As I mentioned, disorder questions are very common because, well, they're very common because like it's the most practical application of anatomy. Like, actually very even. So this is actually an example of a herniated disc. So if you have back pain, like, and you have pain and weakness throughout her legs, so that's kind of where the numbing takes place. Like you kind of squash your central nerve, and then your legs are weak because there's a malfunctioning of the nerve that passes to your legs. But then she's also suffering from back pain, which is like where the disc is being herniated. So that is why for this question, herniated disc is the correct answer. Moving on. This fracture is a can everyone see? Hopefully everyone can see this okay, but you have like a Y-shaped fracture. Yes, this is a spiral fracture. So it's not a green stick fracture actually, because there was maybe a phalangeal line that you might not have seen that went through the bone. There's also it's not a comminuted fracture because all the bones are there's not like individual pieces. In comminuted fractures, they're like completely squashed. Okay, class is supposed to end now. If you have to leave, thank you for coming. But otherwise, I will wrap this Kahoot up quickly. If you have to go, thanks for coming. Next, joint between a frontal and parietal bone of the skull. I haven't mentioned these bones specifically, but they're in the skull, and I also provided you with some definitions. I'm sorry, I didn't finish this one. Diathrosis has a lot of movements, so it's very movable. And I'm hoping you didn't pick diathrosis because if your skull bone moved a lot, then that would mean that your skulls are moving all over the place. And I don't think that's particularly optimal. So it's more optimal for it not to have any movement. And so that is why center thrust is the correct answer. It's also not an biorthosis. Next. If a human has an infinite amount of bone, will he explode? Oh no, I don't think there's anyone to verify that. Doctors recommend receiving sunlight for what reason? Yes, good to see a lot of you answered this one correctly. Just if you have sunlight, then you can synthesize vitamin D. Can you have too much vitamin D? I think your body will control how much vitamin D you synthesize. So like obviously it's not going to just if you're sunbathing, it's not just going to continuously run D3. Can we see the podium longer? I saw a news article about a person who is allergic to okay. Let's see next. Which of the following is a hinge joint? I was talking about this like 5 minutes ago. And one of these is correct. Someone has already typed the correct answer to me in the chat. And yes, it is the knee. The knee is a hinge joint. It can only move in 2 dimensions, but it's just like up, down. So that is the reason. Why does sun make your skin black? That is a question about skin, which I also did. So I can actually answer this. So basically, sun produces UV rays, right? And you definitely don't want UV rays to be hitting your cells. That would be very bad. So what happens is that your skin squeezes out a compound called melanin, and this protein is able to block UV light. And so, but the thing with melanin is that it's very dark. So like, good job to you guys who answered this correctly. Yeah, the nose is hyaline, the between your ribs is fibrocartilage. So yeah, that's melanin. Okay, this is an X-ray image of a man. What's his age?
Does a age of 10 count as a man? It's more like a teenage boy.
Okay. Male. I will reword it to be male. I have a correct explanation here. It is a plate, actually. If you look closely, there's a gap, right? So that signifies the presence of an epiphyseal plate. And because it's a plate, he's probably still in his growing phase. So that would mean that he is probably very young.
Yeah, but does 10 years old count as a man?
I apologize if the wording kind of tripped you up, but I would say yes. Well, I guess sure. Male, female actually doesn't really matter for this one. Well, I guess if it was a female, it would like definitely knock off 20. So maybe I should have actually put female. Who knows? And here's the final podium. So good job to Blair Bun, Ian for the win for getting perfect, and brain. The nervous system is actually one of the topics tested this year, I think. So brain, consider studying the nervous system. All right. I guess that ends the session for today. Thank you all for coming. And yeah, see you next
Thank
week.
you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.